All right, y'all. How we living on Friday? Since it's payday, might as well call it Friday or Pay Fry or something. We all got paid. Who that is? Oh, what up, Shayla? Oh, you finally checked in, huh? You want to continue this conversation that we were having yesterday about the whole infidelity thing? I was going to go deeper in on that today. How you got paid? So you know about that money that you owe me then, right? No, I'm just playing. You can pay me later. It's all good. I'm on my way to my son's game right now. But I'll collect. If I'm not mistaken, no, I'm just playing. I'm not going to get into your paycheck right now. It's all good. Hey, I'm driving too. What a coincidence. But you're listening to me. All right. Well, let me cue your airwaves then. How much time you got? I'll probably be on the road for about 30 minutes or so. Now, what I wanted to do today was talk about something that I've actually, it's been a half hour. You must be going to the same place I'm going. I'm going to Sunnyside. My son's got a game there at 5, but the Fresno to Madera traffic is like almost like suicide causing. So figured, well, I'll just get an early start. But what I wanted to talk about today, and maybe you, Shayla, as a parent now, can semi-relate to, well, not semi, I mean, you'll relate to this to some degree anyway, is, we on social media, everybody talk about what's on their mind and stuff, and, one thing that always gets to me, and I'll be honest, I probably mentioned it before to some degree as well, is how people like to mention when they say, oh, kids these days aren't like how we used to be when we were kids in our day, and obviously, that's true. Kids today are a lot different than, the generation that, us or me as an adult and people like me that, that belong to that same group, a lot different. We don't, you always see that one meme that says like, well, the street lights that come on, like that's what our, curfew was basically. We had to be in the house when the street lights came on. And to a large degree, that's true. I mean, I remember, when I was growing up, we went to school, came home, did our homework, or, we could play outside for a little bit. And, if you had friends in your neighborhood, you can go outside and play. When street lights came on, because the time that you're in school and you're playing, it gets darker a little bit earlier until like springtime rolls around. But hey, street lights come on about 6:30, 7 o'clock. Hey, you're in the house. For one reason or another, you're gonna be getting your homework done for the rest of the night, or get some chores done around the house. Get your stuff ready for the next day, whatever the case. And to a degree, it's not like that anymore. I mean, you don't see a lot of kids that are like just playing outside like on their own right now, and hearing parents say like, oh yeah, well when the street lights come on, a lot of times it's when I text you that it's time to come in, you come in or something like that, and that's how it is, and the way I see it, I'm trying not to be that kind of person that it's called a Luddite mentality, where you simply cannot adapt to the advancement of technology in time. And where that term comes from is like people who used to work in factories and saw their jobs replaced by automation. You know, they would set, you know, their buildings like on fire because they figured, hey, if a robot's going to take my job, just burn the building down. Well, you know, some parents have this concept that, you know, you don't change the times, or you don't change with the times. But I think it kind of goes both ways. I mean, we can't control the entire world around us. So I think what it is that kids change with, you know, the factors that surround the world. And as parents, you know, we can control what's in our household. But this is what I'm trying to say is I think, you know, you got to put certain things into perspective. If we were to drop our kids off today into the generation that we grew up in, you can't sit there and say like, oh, they wouldn't be able to handle it. It's a survival mentality. We're humans. We are born with a natural survival instinct. If we were to drop 2017's kids off back into like 1995, you know, would they survive? Yeah, they would survive, but it would be a culture shock, and that's just obvious. If we were, you know, to be dropped off from 1995 into 2017, you know, I honestly think that like people of our era, if we were to get dropped off 20 years into the future as children, we wouldn't be able to handle that society as it was happening because we didn't have anything to do with the advancement of, you know, anything up to that point. So, you know, in 1995, yeah, we didn't have tablets, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have text messaging, you know, all that kind of stuff. But if we were to get transported from 95 or 2015, or just a 20-year jump, you know, we say, well, what's text messaging? Or, you know, what's social media? Like, oh, you can talk to your friends, like, through your phone? Like, you can just type up a message and your friend knows what you're doing at that moment? That's so cool, you know? It would be a shock, though, right? One way or another. But at the same time, if we were to drop our kids off back into the past, you know, no tablets, no cell phones, no social media, no advent of like widespread, you know, cable TV, you know, that kind of stuff. I think those are pretty much like the biggest advancements, you know, technology, because I think social interaction hasn't changed. It's just the level that we do it has changed. Now you can say, well, if the level has changed, then social interaction has changed. But that's kind of like a double-bladed, you know, or double-edged sword, you know, with no handle. Because if you take away what causes us to interact socially less nowadays, we would still interact the same way that we used to 20 years ago. So really, the only thing that has changed is, you know, what I like to call the inanimate objects that have become, you know, what we utilize on a daily basis. And so, you know, if I was to take my, you know, 15-year-old self into, you know, this current time frame, 2017. I mean, as a 15-year-old, I didn't have a cell phone or a tablet. You know what my contact list was? I had like a piece of, you know, college ruled paper that was folded up into this wallet that had all my contacts on it. Like, had my buddy's, you know, house number, had my, you know, brother's house number, all this stuff. And if I wanted, you know, get in contact with somebody, either use use the house phone, or, you know, go make a call at the payphone. I mean, literally, think about it. Who do you know that has used a payphone more than once in the last 2 to 3 years? I don't remember the last time I used a payphone. Like, period. I don't remember. I usually remember this kind of stuff, but it doesn't come off my head right now. Like, yeah, I had used a payphone like a couple of times, like my phone was dead. No, I don't remember. So, if you were to take today's kids and drop them off with no tablets, no cell phone, we're not talking dropping them off in the 1800s, you know, but I was thinking about it like today's kids being dropped off in the 90s would be almost equivalent to being in the Stone Age, you know, to a degree. I don't know if they know how to function like as well, but I think the roles are switched. If we were to have a 20-year quantum leap from where we were as kids into the future, I don't think we would be just as successful to adapting as they would, because we would be forced to keep up with times, you know, or I would say catch up with times. If you were to go backwards, you can be told what was the scenario of the way of life back then, and you can mentally, you know, try to deal with. Like, if I was like, say I'm going to go back to the 50s, like, hey, you know, women didn't work, they stayed home, housewives took care of the kids, made dinner when they came home. Like, hey, as a chauvinistic guy, that'd be a great time to go back, you know, not in, you know, today's, you know, women's lib, equality, equal pay, all that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's how I am. I'm saying, as a chauvinistic guy that would want to go back to the past, and he know what he'd be dealing with. Now, if you were to take a 1950s guy that would deal with, you know, women that didn't talk back, cooked the dinner, had the kids, you know, he went to work, you know, all that stuff, and you dropped him off into, you know, 2005, you know, a 25-year-old male in 1950 to drop him off in, you know, 2005, he would blow his head off. Like, I honestly think he would commit suicide, because his expectations of how life are, you know, going into that mode and then having to, you know, adapt to, you know, people's mentalities, you know, there wasn't a lot of, you know, advancement for, you know, the LBGT, I forget how LGBT, I just don't know how to pronounce that. I think it's LBGT. Anyhow, back in the 50s, people that belonged to that, you know, umbrella of people were very, number one, they weren't very well widespread. There wasn't a lot of people like that at that time, but the few that were very much looked down upon. I mean, that just was not an accepted part of society, way less than what it is now. So, you know, you take somebody from that era and you drop them off into, you know, today's current state, and then they say like, oh, what are these kind of people, and how come they get to do this and that? In my day, like, where I come from, no, that's a culture shock, and they can't, you know, some people do not adapt well to that kind of environment. But if you were to go backwards and then you say, well, I know that if I'm part of the LBGT, you know, umbrella of people, and I was to go back to 1950, knowing that people didn't or wouldn't be too accepting of, you know, my chosen way of life, then I would have to adapt to that, you know, in order to survive. Because back then, hey, this is before the civil rights. People didn't really give a dang about, you know, your value of human life as much back then as they do now. Let's just keep it real. At least in certain parts of the country anyway. But, you know, just put today's kids in 1995. We can't sit there and say that they wouldn't know how to survive, or they wouldn't know how to handle it. So they have their phones taken away. So they don't have their tablets or their emails or their MySpaces or, face chats, whatever that type of stuff. No big deal. I mean, as adults, if we as adults went back to 1995, like right now, if you take a 30-year-old adult right now and took them back to 1995, no cell phone, no iPhones, no, Samsung Note 7 or all that stuff, wouldn't be able to handle society. Now, maybe you could, because you have lived in that area previously, and that's okay, but you can't sit there and argue that you would have the same lifestyle that you have now, because obviously things are different. So we can't sit there and say, oh, today's kids are soft and they don't know about this or that. The way I see it, the only people to blame are today's parents. And who are today's parents? Those of us who came from that era that we sit there and criticize today's kids for not having gone through and making us the kind of people that we are today. But what kind of people did we become today that we allowed our kids to not be like how we were as kids? If we're going to sit there and criticize other kids or criticize kids for not being tough to handle things, or, they're so socially bent awkward because they don't know how to interact with one another the way that we used to have to, because we didn't have, shorter pathways of having to interact with people. Now, when I say shorter pathways, obviously I mean, yeah, you can just send a text to your buddy, I'm at home, WYD question mark. You know what, a text message saying WYD question mark, that used to be a 5-minute walk to your buddy's house saying, hey, what you doing, dog? You want to, shoot some hoops outside? Nowadays, you can say WYD question mark, and you might not even get a text back until the next morning. Why, you might have been waiting for that person to respond so you can, base a plan around that or something. So take that away from today's kids, and okay, they're gonna say, oh man, I want to see what my buddy's up to. I think I'll just go over to his house, knock on the door or whatever, because that's what we did. We didn't know any better, and we didn't have any other options or alternatives. We didn't, go to your local text messaging center and say, oh, I'm going to text my buddy, and if he, doesn't text me back within like 5 minutes, and I'm just going to go home. No, you just go to your buddy's house. Well, if you took today's kid that would usually text his buddy saying, hey, WYD, question mark, you drop him off in 1995, all of a sudden, he doesn't have that option. He's going to get up off his butt, walk over to his buddy's house, knock on the door, say, hey man, what are you up to? Let's go to the store, or let's go shoot some hoops. Let's go over to little Timmy's house and see what he's up to, instead of like group chatting or group texting, all that kind of stuff. So, I think what it is that, kids just go with the time. Now, if we had tablets and cell phones and emails and, space and whatever, social medias were around back then and stuff, no doubt we would say, oh, hey, we're supposed to be throwing a kickback tomorrow night. My parents are going to be gone. Let everybody know. No. Back in that day, we had to say, hey, you'd be at school. Like, hey, I'm about to have kickback at the house. Now, you go like person to person. Today's kids would do that if they didn't have the various ways of communication that they do have. But at the same time, if we had those capabilities back then, we would have definitely taken advantage of it. And who's to say that, we may have earlier on became the kind of generation that kids are living in nowadays? And how can we criticize that? So I think what it is that as parents, we have to say, today's world is what it is. And we can make our household, the best way that we can make it. And it all becomes an independent thing, like from household to household. But you think about collectively, the generation that we belong to as parents, to sit there and say, or to talk about how kids are like soft, or they're not like how we were, they don't do things the way we used to do it. Well, that's because we didn't have the resources, or we weren't as available to the ways of how kids interact and choose to interact with one another these days, because it just wasn't how things were back then. If it was, that's how we be. But what are we going to do? Are we going to straight up like boycott all, advancements of society just to sit there and say, well, now you kids know what we used to have to go through like back in my day? No, all we can do is say like, well, this is what it is, but we can choose to tell our children like, hey, when I say it's time to, not be on your phone as much, or don't be so addicted to your gadgets, the way that we were raised, and think about this too, how many people sit there or can sit there and say when they were at that age that they didn't have any problem whatsoever with how they were raised? Every kid has an issue with, how they're raised. From our generation, we can say, oh, our parents were strict. When I was growing up, my parents didn't let me do this, do that. And now we're parents, and we sit there and say, like, man, I don't know if my parents were that strict, after all. It's like, well, of course not. But at the same time, were you a badass kid? And people say like, oh no, I wasn't no badass kid. My parents would never, tolerate that. Okay, well, if your parents never tolerated that, would you rather have been a badass kid without having strict parents? Or would you rather have had strict parents and you grew up on the straight and narrow and you try to, pass that, on to your kids, so they can become, the same kind of productive member of society that you will take some pride and claim about being, and try to pass that on to them. I mean, personally, I know for a fact my children may grow up thinking that, I'm strict or whatever. And yeah, when I grew up, I used to always like, man, my parents will never let me do nothing. But I didn't grow up getting in trouble. I didn't grow up, robbing folks or, anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I got into a little bit of trouble, no big deal. But guess what happened when I got in trouble? I got my ass whooped. And who could I run to if I got in trouble and literally got my, two cheeks ass whooped? That's what happened. It's not like, got in trouble, got yelled at. I literally had belts go across the crack of my butt, when I got in trouble. Yeah, it hurt up until I got to a certain age where, you take so many butt whoopings that it's like, oh, here we go again. You ever see that movie Street Fighter when they got captured like at the end and the dude was getting whipped by that dude in the dungeon and he wasn't even like flinching because he told himself as a sumo wrestler he's trained to have his mind somewhere else. You know, that's how ass whoopings were to me after a while. I mean, I didn't want it to happen, but it wasn't like, oh man, I can't deal with this. This is so painful and get me out of this world. Like, no. Nobody saw Street Fighter. Yeah, I did. I saw it twice in the movie theater. I was just watching it on AMC last week. Shayla, what are you talking about? I watched that thing from beginning to end. I even watched the commercials. Don't tell me nobody watched Street Fighter. That was one of the best movies. I'm not even going to finish that sentence. But anyhow, nobody saw Street Fighter, but you know about Street Fighter, which means I think you saw it, Shayla. But, I mean, seriously, Ming Na as Chun-Li. I mean, did you see that all-black outfit she was wearing in the middle of that movie? My God. But anyhow, but I digress. Back to the point. You get in trouble, you got your ass whipped. I don't even know if CPS was around back then. I think they were, but they weren't like, the Gestapo function, that they are nowadays. I mean, you sit there, you even like yell at your kid in the store for crying. I mean, that's kind of like maybe a little bit, I don't want to say heinous, but maybe that's doing a little too much. But if you even like give your kid like the death stare, CPS right there, like, hey, what are you doing here? Who gave you permission to look at your own kid like that? Back then, you can get your ass whipped in front of the President of the United States, and he wouldn't do a dang thing but say, hey, kids these days need their lessons learned, and when I grew up, we used to get butt whippings on the daily. Nowadays, you even get mad at your kid for, spilling soda all over the stove, and you're just like, your neighbors are all up in your business. Like, you can't get mad at your kid for doing that. Well, he's 12. He should know better than to take a soda can and start pouring it all over the damn stove. What the hell's wrong with this kid? But, that, was where I think society changed. That people, and I'm just going to be honest, I don't care who disagrees with me, and I'm going to be completely honest. This is why I'm single. The reason why kids are the way they are today is because parents got away from whooping their kids. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, if your kid, doesn't go to sleep on time, choke him to wake him up, or something like that. I'm not sitting there condoning like corporal punishment or anything to that degree. But when kids get in trouble, you punish them accordingly. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. When I grew up, I didn't even know what the a timeout was. You know what a timeout was when I was growing up? Something that they did in football and basketball when I watched it on TV. That's the only time I ever saw a timeout. I mean, a timeout like towards the end of the fourth quarter, you're trying to, come back, and like score a game-winning touchdown, or the game's tied in the fourth quarter of a basketball game, and you're trying to get that last shot. To me, that's what a timeout was. I don't even think I heard of a timeout till I was like in my 20s. And, because we didn't get them in school. We didn't like get in trouble at school and say, all right, timeout, Buster. Go sit in the corner for 30 minutes and think about what you did. Now, we didn't get our asses whipped by our teachers, but, we used to have like the cards. You had the green card, the yellow card, the red card, and the black card. And if you had those cards moved, you was at the principal's office. Principals were calling your parents. And that's what you didn't want to happen. You didn't want the principal or you didn't want the school in general to call your parents like, well, little Johnny was, calling me a punk bitch in the classroom today. And, so I had to move his card. And, you get that call. Well, when you get home, you're going to get whooped like the punk bitch that you called your teacher. That's just what happened. I mean, there's no way around it. You got today's kids can probably walk into their classroom and say, hey, Mrs. Punk Bitch Johnson. And when they get home, what is mom gonna do? Mom's gonna say, "Why did you call your teacher a punk bitch, Timmy? You know that's not nice. Now go sit down and think about what you did." He's gonna go back to school tomorrow and think, "Oh shit, I didn't even get in trouble. Like, I had to sit down and think about what I did. Wow, I got off the hook. I could probably do this again if I felt like it because I'm not really in trouble." You know, in my, "Oh, you're going to pull my card for whipping my kid." I never said I whipped my kid, Shayla. All I said was that parents today got away from whipping their kids like how we used to get whipped back in the day for getting in trouble for doing stupid shit. But I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't ever, like, you know, give my kids a little pop or something. I mean, literally, you can ask Mateo, like, have I ever, like, whooped him? I mean, I've gotten mad at him and, you know, yeah, I've, you know, spanked him and stuff like that. But god dang, he's bigger than me now. It's kind of it's kind of hard to, you know, whoop a child to inflict, you know, reasonable pain that makes them think about what they did. But at the same time, I've imposed my sense of discipline enough on him that for the most part he knows not to think, or he knows to not do stupid stuff that would result in me taking it to that level. But anyhow, you know, you sit there and say, "Oh yeah, go. You had your cards pulled at school today." I mean, if I had the school call my parents because I had my cards pulled, then it was like, swear to God, I didn't even want to go home. I'm just gonna keep it real. I did not want to go home. I'm like, I'd rather just stay at school. You know, I'd take the longest walk home because that's the kind of thing that would bring my parents home from work earlier than usual. Or if I got home and they weren't at the house yet, I'm thinking, okay, I got like this amount of time of freedom before they come to that door. They ain't even gonna say nothing. You know, they're just gonna, you know, literally go back to work on me. And so we didn't want that. We were going to school thinking, man, if I get in trouble here, it's going to be, you know, worse at home. But now when kids get in trouble and they come home, it's like a vacation for them. All you do is like you take away like their video game or something, but most of the time they get it back like the next day. You know, I'll be honest, like my son got in trouble at school. I think it was 5th or 6th grade. And he had got in trouble at school with this other kid. And they gave both kids a day off of school to, you know, sit there and make them think about it. And I'm thinking to myself, like, well, you know, this ain't cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my son does not want to have to stay home again under my watch. Because what did I do? I put his ass to double work, you know, at home all day. I woke him up before he would have had to go to school, like regular time, and I made him work twice as hard during the hours that he would have been at school. And then I just, you know, basically made him, you know, I don't want to use the SLAVE word, but I made him do so much housework that he was probably ready to just, you know, not ever do anything else again. Now, I didn't exactly like whoop him, but I put in a sense of punishment that, you know, makes you realize like, whoa, hey, you know, maybe doing this kind of, you know, dumb stuff ain't cool, and I shouldn't do this again. And so I think it was lesson learned, and to this day, he hasn't ever been in trouble at school again, and that was really the only time he was ever in trouble at school. So, where's the gate at? So I think it's about how we as parents have changed, not, how society has changed. It has everything to do with how we have become as parents. Have we become too relaxed, too stand pat-ish about, oh, I don't want to be as tough on my kids as my parents were to me. It's like, okay, fine, but do you think that, you behave better than lazy? Who's lazy? Who do you think has become a more behaved person? You or your kids? And do you think it has a direct result from how you choose to discipline and raise them, in contrast to how your parents raised you? Lazy parenting. Calling me a lazy parent, Shayla? Because I made my kid do some work? No, and I'll be honest, when he had got in trouble at school that one time, I took it as a reflection on me. Like, I didn't teach that lesson ahead of time. So I had to take my own self-stock and say, like, well, I dropped the ball on this, so I can't really be as rough as I probably wanted to. But that only lasts like for a little bit, because it is easy to sweep things under the rug by not upholding. Right. And like I said, that's, for anybody out there who may be wondering, like, that's why I'm single. Because I have that tendency to, be a little bit quicker on the punishment. When things happen that, require a certain kind of punishment or a certain level of enacting that kind of thing. And, it's because that's where I came from. I came from a situation, my mom always kept on my punishment. Yeah, same here. If you got in trouble like in a public place and say, I ain't gonna whip your ass here, but when we get home, don't even think about going straight to your room, because we're gonna handle this as soon as we walk in the door. No. And the thing about it is, like, that concept is so, like, grotesque and so foreign to people these days that it's like, you take them back to that world and those kind of people wouldn't last. I'm like, well, what kind of world did you grow up in? Like, did you grow up in a house where you just got to do whatever the hell you wanted? I mean, hell, I'll be honest, I would have loved to grow up in that kind of house where I was enabled and, got to do whatever the heck I wanted, and gee whiz, that would have been lovely, but I'd probably be a criminal at this point. I would have probably been a gang member in high school, because why not? Why would my parents have cared what I did? But, that's why I say, you take some of today's kids, drop them off into 1999 or 1995 standards of, you can get your ass whooped for, spilling soda on the hot stove, or, something like that. And without CPS showing up, without everybody being like all up in your business. And then it's just like, well, nope, they wouldn't be able to function. They would literally just, crash, like, under those circumstances. So, you talk about dropping our generation of kids into today's society, and we get in trouble, and then they say, oh, it's okay, Mateo, you got into a fight at school, just go sit down over there somewhere, and then 30 minutes later I'll ask you, have you thought about what you've done? And then you'll be cured of all your ills at that point. Like, no. One hand, or one side of this hand or the other, is going to be going across something. You get in trouble. And I'm not sitting there saying that it's okay to beat your kids. It's not. I'm not saying beat your kids. All I'm saying is, and this is what I've always said, if you raise your kids to grow up without fear of consequences, they're more likely to become criminals, because criminals don't care about the consequences of their actions. They don't. They're going to sit there and rob a bank and say, well, I don't care if I go to jail because, I know that's a possibility. But then you got some kids that are afraid of consequences, and they say, like, well, maybe I shouldn't rob this bank because I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. They might rape me in the showers in jail or something. I mean, unless getting raped in the shower is your thing, it's not my thing, but so I'm not trying to go to jail. So I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure I don't go to jail. I'm not robbing banks. I'm not, knocking folks over for their handbags and all that kind of stuff. It's just not who I am. But I think that's because I was raised in a household that said, hey, don't do stupid shit. And if you do, there's going to be a penalty, a literal physical penalty. Now as an adult, you do something stupid, there's literal physical penalties. But when kids grow up in society, today's society, more so than previous levels of society, grow up thinking that, it's okay to do things that should have consequences and they don't pay any consequences for it. It's going to get ingrained into their head that they can act without fear of consequences or reprisals. That's what I'm saying. It's about how we've developed as parents that have allowed this kind of thing to happen. We can't sit there and criticize today's kids for being how they are, because if that's the case, that's how we made them. If you're going to sit there and criticize today's kids, you basically made it happen. They didn't make this world. They only live in it. You made them. You made the world that they live in. So, like they always say, like, they didn't ask to be here. That's fine. But you want kids to grow up and be like how things were when you were growing up, then you make society that way. So, however you guys want to take it, that's fine. Let me know what y'all think. My son's got a game right now. See y'all later.